Next Generation qualifications and standards here at SQA. And I'm sure that I and some of my colleagues on the call today will be familiar faces to most of you by now. If you have been at our previous webinars and have come back for more, welcome, and a particular welcome to anybody that's joining us for the first time today. I'm not going to say too much in my introduction, other than to say we'll be following our usual format. The cameras will be off for the duration of the presentation. We'll put the cameras back on at the end if you wish for any question and answer session. We have got a real treat in store today. I've been really looking forward to today's session. We are joined by Alan Moffat, Head of Department at New College, Lanarkshire, and Dominic Phillips, who is a lecturer in Edinburgh College. And they are going to speak today about their personal experiences of their delivery of NextGen HN television. They're approaching the end of the first academic year, and both Alan and Dom have certainly been pioneers. So we are delighted to have them on board today and are really excited about their update, as I'm sure you will be too. There's loads of good work in there. The format today will be relatively straightforward. My colleague Jane Henderson, a new product development manager, is going to speak to you about the project itself, do a bit of scene setting for you. Then we'll hand over to Dom, and then hand over to Alan, and then I will say a few words at the end. Because it is quite a packed session, the time available for any verbal questions and answers at the end may be quite tight, but as always, we are joined by a number of SQA colleagues on the call who will be happy to answer any questions that they can in the chat as they go along. And in particular, Gail English, the qualification manager for HNC Television, has joined us today. So I'm sure if there are any subject specific questions, Gail will be happy to pick them up as we go along. So with no further to do, I'm going to hand over to Jane.
Thank you so much, Val, and thank you, Helen, for the slide. I have a very easy job, just a couple of slides before we hand over to our main presenters. But we're aware that in our audience today, there might be some who are coming to NextGen quite fresh. And as we celebrate the end of our first year of pilot delivery, it's always good to look back at where we started. And we started with a vision for NextGen HN, which is in front of you now. Let's not read it word for word, but let's look at the key words in here: dynamic, flexible, developing skills, developing self-awareness, creativity and resilience, meeting industry and societal needs, empowering, enabling, in a fast-changing and complex world. And I'm really confident that what Dominic and Alan will be sharing with you today will tie in very, very nicely with the HN NextGen vision. Just quickly on to the next slide. Thank you, Helen. So again, tiny bit of background. Over session 20 to 21, 4 qualifications were developed. They were our very first trailblazers in NextGen: TV and computing, and engineering. 2 different qualifications in computing, that's why there's 4. And when we went out to invite people to pilot, it was Edinburgh College and New College Lanarkshire who responded to that invitation, hence they are with us today. Over approximately 70 candidates are taking the NextGen qualification this year, and we just wanted to highlight to you before handing over that around and behind the qualification development, there is a huge amount of project strand work going on to support and underpin and enhance that qualification development. We have 18 specialist strands in total. We've only represented some of them there for you today, but meta skills, grading, change impact, digital learning and assessment, learning for sustainability, articulation and progression, digital publishing, and learner research and engagement. They have touched the prototype pilot delivery over the course of this year. Dominic and Alan have contributed to those strands, and so we just wanted to highlight that they are also part of the picture. But it's now time for me to hand over, and we're really looking forward to hearing, first of all, from Dominic and his experience of NextGen at Edinburgh College. Thank you.
Hello, so I'm Dominic Phillips. I teach the television course at Edinburgh College, and I'm just going to reflect on some of my experiences with this year's pilot of the NextGen qualifications. I think Alan's going to go into a wee bit more detail about the technical aspects, but I'm just going to give an overview of the practical side of things, specifically in relation to assessment requirements and project integration. So before I talk about where we are now, I'd quite like to talk about where we were before. So on this slide, you should be able to see at the centre we have our graded unit, and around that we had 12 either 1 or 2 credit units, each containing their own assessment requirements. Now, we worked out a long time ago that some of these requirements actually overlapped with the requirements of the graded unit. There was no point getting students to do the same work over and over again, so we started integrating requirements from these units into the graded unit project. It became pretty clear to us that the best way to reduce the assessment workload for the students was to integrate as much as we could. So on this slide, you can see the problem with that. It ends up looking kind of unbalanced. Even though we were able to integrate as much as we could into our graded unit project, we still had all these standalone assessments running throughout the year. And because we had different staff delivering these different units, the assessments would sometimes overlap and sometimes they were happening at the same time, which wasn't ideal. And because we'd integrated so much into the graded unit project, it became huge. We also had to do it at the end of the year, which meant the schedule was very much end loaded and completely unbalanced. So the end of our academic year was really busy. I'm sure anyone who teaches knows the same. It's a really busy, really stressful time of the year for students and for lecturers who have to mark all of that graded unit work in such a short space of time. So we knew that we needed to spread the assessments out a little bit better. We knew we needed to get rid of these standalone assessments and integrate more into project work. So we'd hit a brick wall though, and we couldn't find a way of doing either of these things. No matter how hard we tried to bash the requirements of these units into the graded unit jigsaw puzzle, we just couldn't do it. So just about the right time, the SQA phoned us up and said, "Hi Dom, do you fancy doing the pilot for the NextGen HNC?" And I said, "Can we get rid of the graded unit?" And they said, "Yep." I said, "Can we integrate more of our assessment requirements?" They said, "Yep." And I said, "Okay, I'm in." Yeah, that's not exactly how the conversation went, but yeah, you get the idea. So this slide that we see here just now, so this is what we have at the moment. We have 2 huge or big 5 credit units in the middle, which my team affectionately named jumbo units. Wasn't too sure about how the SQA would feel about us calling their beautifully designed units jumbo, but yeah, I won't tell them if you don't. We were also able to choose 5 credits worth of optional units to fit in around this. We were kind of smart about this. We managed to pick 4 units at least, which we were able to integrate our requirements into one huge project. We still had 1 unit, unfortunately, that yeah, didn't integrate into our project work at all, critical analysis of text. But we have a plan to remove that next year, replace it with script writing that we can integrate a wee bit better. So going back to the jumbo units, actually mentioning that they were beautifully designed, the requirements of both of these units ended up integrating so seamlessly that it felt like they could even have been merged into 1 mega jumbo unit worth about 10 credits. So yeah, we were really excited to be able to leap over that brick wall that we'd hit with the legacy course. Although this is where the real work had to begin. We had to map all of the outcome requirements of 6 units into our project work. Oh, good timing with the slide there. So this is the mapping document that we created. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. I copied and pasted every single requirement from every outcome of all 6 units into this document and set about reordering them into recognizable project workflow. The advice from the SQ was to keep it simple, but the way I saw it, the only way to make it simple is to make it complicated first, as you can see. So we decided to break everything down into the smallest detail before we could build it back into something simple. I think I compared it to a watchmaker fixing a watch, taking all the pieces apart, cleaning them, fixing them, and then putting them back together. So our process meant mixing all of the outcomes around, but that was kind of the idea. We wanted one project to rule them all, basically, one project that met the requirements of all 6 units combined. Next slide, please, Helen. So this is what it looked like, a super mega jumbo project. Obviously, there's no way we could have assessed like this. It's absolutely huge, and that was the problem with the graded unit. That's the thing we were trying to get away from, the thing we were trying to fix. So luckily, without the constraints of the graded unit, there was a very simple solution. So this is what we did. We, having built everything up and ensuring all the requirements were covered, we then split the super mega jumbo project into 4 and distributed the requirements evenly between the 4 separate projects. Next slide, please, Helen. So what that allowed us to do was to plan an assessment schedule where we could place the projects evenly throughout the year. We did still have these little blue standalone assessments for that one pesky unit where, as I say, we're swapping that one out next year. So one of the things we anticipated at the start of the year was that if we were going to be integrating so much of the assessment work, we were going to have to do more of take more of an integrated and collaborative approach to teaching too. So this is what we did. So in the past, our teaching team have created our own learning, teaching and assessment plans, but this year we thought it'd be far more sensible to create a joint plan so we could store this document on Microsoft Teams, and it just meant that we could all work on this document at the same time and plan the assessment schedule, plan our classes and things like that. It just meant that everyone was on the same page, quite literally. Yeah, so more often than not, staff are doing their own thing, and students are jumping from one topic to another completely unrelated topic the next day, and it just always seemed like a bit of an issue in my opinion. So being able to work and create this flow and continuity between the lesson plans really worked out quite well. So can we have the next slide, please, Helen? So this is what our assessment schedules look like when you put them side by side, the legacy version of the course versus the NextGen version. So the NextGen version just looks a lot more balanced and makes for a better experience for everyone involved. So yeah, I think that would be my main advice to anyone teaching NextGen next year, is to try and make your assessment schedule look like a pineapple and blueberry kebab rather than this weird kind of colourful solar system, which is old gen. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, just to sum up, I think my experience with NextGen is, yeah, I'm delighted with it. It does pretty much everything we needed it to do. It improves the course for the students and for us. We've reduced the number of standalone assessments, which meant we could then reduce the assessment workload for the students, which means, yeah, the big bonus, we can reduce the marking workload for ourselves. It allowed us to schedule assessments for a more evenly balanced schedule throughout the year. The big benefit of that is we were able to monitor student progress from the start of the year and throughout the year. Not just that, but the students could monitor their own progress as well. We quite heavily relied on the students producing SWOT analysis for the meta skills part of the NextGen. So that continual assessment really helped with that. And last but not least, the NextGen's allowed the students to learn by doing. So our course, television, is incredibly practical, kind of vocational course. a lecturer could quite easily stand in front of the class and talk about making television programs for months, but the best way for students to learn is to get out there and make television programs themselves. So yeah, I've loved delivering the pilot in NextGen. I can't lie, it's been an awful lot of hard work and a lot of stress, mostly at the planning stage at the start of the year. But I think it's been well worth it for us and for the students as well. I'm really looking forward to next year, where we can fix all the mistakes that we've made. Or yeah, not actually, we haven't made any mistakes. We've just done things that we could do a little better. So we're going to fix those next year. Many thanks for listening. I hope my strange images have made some kind of sense. Looking forward to answering some questions at the end, but for now I shall pass you back.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Dom. The visualizations there were just so striking and so easy to understand and appreciate, rather than words on a page. And you know, that blueberry kebab is just, it's going to go down in history. It's going to become part of NextGen, NextGen mythology for sure. Thank you so much for that. And we'll hear now from Alan and New College Lanarkshire. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I think what first of all, I'm Alan Moffat. I'm the head of department for visual and creative arts in New College Lanarkshire, but I also still teach within the film and TV department, and I was instrumental in bringing it to the department first and foremost as a result of what I saw during the pandemic when we went to Cross Ames, and we'd already been working in this kind of matrix fashion in order to map our projects to the learning outcomes that were kind of within that. So when the opportunity to basically become a pilot centre came up, I absolutely pushed hard for it. And we sat down with the team and we spoke around the planning of it. So Dominic mentioned there about the hard work that goes into it. And certainly a lot of hard work was put into putting together a plan that involved bringing the staff on board with it, because anything new, any sort of change, what I've come to realise in the 15 years I've been in FE is it can be a bit scary for people. So I needed to make sure that the team were totally on board and that they were absolutely 100% behind the project, because I don't think we would have got through it if I didn't have that. And I had two great members of staff. So I went in and I actually spoke to the two members of staff who I identified could do this justice and got them on board with that. So that was a huge part of it. In terms of I want to talk a wee bit about the support that went in place with regards and especially in and around the quality assurance. That was great because it felt that layer of support meant that you weren't making any catastrophic mistakes. You are going to, we were fully prepared to make some mistakes, but because we had that level of support and buy-in from SQA, there was nothing that was ever going to be critical that would mean that you weren't going to be compliant, for example. So the support we had from day one right through to the end has been brilliant. And and I think what you need to if you're going to be part of the pilot centre delivery, it's incumbent on you to go to them and ask them questions, or if you've got any doubts, it's really critical, because I found that very valuable. And I was able then to kind of reassure the team that we were doing well, because when you're doing something new, you don't have the context, do you, to compare it to anything. So it was good to speak to Dominic and have that, you weren't such a lone voice, if you like, and you weren't kind of on your own with us. So seeing what Edinburgh were doing was great for us as well. We used Teams, and prior to us using Teams, we had been using Mahara ePortfolio, and we'd been using it for 10 years. And I literally got a phone call from a member of staff saying, why don't we just move everything over to Teams? Because we'd been using it during the pandemic, and within a day, we'd managed to move everything over from our ePortfolio system into the Teams Microsoft Teams, and it was the best thing we ever did. And I'll talk to a wee bit about that as we go on. Next slide, please. This is a wee bit on just touching on what Dominic was talking about there about mapping the projects to the criteria within the learning outcomes. And the big thing that we always talk about within the television QDTs and QSTs, and when teams come together and they speak, was the amount of assessment that students were asked to do, and the amount of repetition that sometimes takes place as well. And Dominic nicely put that when he spoke about, you know, not really having a handle on what other lecturers were doing sometimes, when there was the number of learning outcomes that you had to get through, or the number of assessments. So we managed to reduce the assessment burden on the learner, and I think I counted it. We took it from 33 down to about 16 or 17. And that was critical, because what we were then able to do is concentrate much more on the project driven assessment that we wanted to put at the heart of this. So that was a critical thing for us, because aligned to that is this idea when you go in, you speak to people in industry and they talk about outcomes and they talk about being able to deliver on projects, it kind of shifts away from the more academic kind of framework that we sometimes get caught up in. And practice in our area, and as Dominic referred to, is absolutely critical. It's about, you know, demonstrating key competencies around technical knowledge, but how do you then apply that? That's a really important factor. So we were able to take the projects, rip them apart and map them to the learning outcomes. And this was all shared with the staff, so they all knew. And there was a bit of a support plan in place with that as well, so that I identified which member of staff was going to take which unit, and they were going to be supported by myself to kind of go through this. Next slide, please. And that's, again, timetabling. It's something that if you don't get right, it can have a catastrophic effect on your year. And, you know, I'm sure anybody who's been involved in timetabling or been involved in the process, it can kind of, you know, it can go south very quickly if you don't get that. And I was very clear about the staff that I brought in, Alec Cheer and Kevin Walls, both highly professional, both highly experienced industry practitioners who totally bought into this idea. And I was able to identify the skill sets that they could bring and match them to the projects that we're putting in there. So it's about knowing your staff and about getting a real kind of handle on your team to make sure that the learners get the best possible experience. Next slide, please. And we used Teams extensively. We used it for everything. We delivered our learning and teaching on it. We communicated with our students through the tutorial guidance slots, for example. We used the chat function to use as evidence through the meta skills in terms of how engaged students were. We were quite keen at the very beginning to tell the students and give them the information at the beginning of the course about what the expectations were going forward and how much they had to kind of contribute to this as well. So there was a huge emphasis on them buying into this new way of working, but also engaging in this manner as well. And they all took to Teams quite easily, and it wasn't really a huge issue. And also you've got that thing about accessibility when we went through that lockdown, and we were able to still engage and communicate with the students, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, the 2 years has taught us that was quite critical. Next slide, please. So just to talk about the practice, getting the students to on board at the beginning was critical, and being able to almost sell them the idea of what this qualification was and why it was important, and why this idea that the project-driven assessment strategy was critical to getting good outcomes for them. And what happened, as we saw through the year, was the quality of the student work improved immensely. And when I compare it to the year that we were doing before, they had a bit more time and they could spend a bit more put a bit more care into the work that they were doing, because they had a bit more space to do so, which is what this was designed to be, I think. And as a result, the outcomes were better. They were making better quality content, which Dominic will back me up on this. This is what the industry really wants at the end of the day. It's about trying to kind of get that. Interestingly, we were able to really get good data on the students themselves through Microsoft Teams, and we used that when we asked the students to put together reflective journals. And what we did at the same time is we ran staff commentaries. Myself and Lanarkshire separately had an overview of what was happening in the classes. So we would give these staff commentaries about activities that were taking place, and then we were able to then triangulate it with the students' evidence themselves when they were reflecting on their own performance, but and also other students' performance as well. So there's a sense of awareness that they are not creating things in a vacuum. They're not creating things in a bubble. They're having to contribute as part of a wider team, but they're also having to think about the contribution that they are making to the team, which I felt was a really good way of talking to them about why meta skills, and that element was quite important. Having that self-awareness is sometimes almost impossible to teach, and I think it's only something that you get through practice and learning and making mistakes and doing things, and being able to come on the other side and think, right, that maybe could have done that better. So we got all that, and we all evidenced it through the system that we set up. Next slide, please. And again, I don't know why I put that in. That's just about assignments. I tell you why I put that in. That was, we set all the assignments on through Teams, and it enabled me to go into the grading system and map their progress from day one. So we were able to go in and look at the contribution that we were making with the assignments that were setting them. We were able to look at the contribution that we're making in the group work and the practical activities, and then in the round we were able to then make a decision on the grading, the new grading system. And it was to do with how they were performing consistently over the year, and we were able to see those students who were sitting within the distinction category in terms of the work and the contribution they'd made to the groups themselves, but also the individual contributions that they made. And that was all evidenced through the data that we're getting back. So, for example, you give someone an assignment, and if you've got 3 or 4 marked assignments in that, and that you're scoring consistently high, then you are doing, pretty well at that point. But then I'm able to go in and look at the evidence in terms of the reflective journals, which we were very keen on pushing. Next slide, please. And there's an example of a reflective practice, and someone talking and putting a diary together of events and evidencing it through a mixture of media, videos, links, photographs, text. I gave them the option of making it purely video evidence-based, and we had a student who done all the reflective diaries through video, and it was a great way of evidencing that, and also great for practicing editing skills, for example. So all these things that we're doing instinctively, we're able to kind of map it through the systems and the processes that we're putting up. And this was one of our students who ended up being one of our top students. I think she got the Student of the Year for the HNC student this year, just because she was consistently working to such a high standard from August all the way to literally 2 days ago, where she came in and volunteered to do a bit of editing for an HND project, which is even out with her scope. She didn't have to do that, but she wanted to come in. So it's just great to kind of have that space to do that. Next. And then that's a bit about my commentary. And I started this back in August. I did the famous or the infamous Myers-Briggs test with them. We put them into groups based on a couple of activities that we set them early on. But then what we did was we made sure that we rotated the roles and rotated the people within the groups. So we quite quickly established those who were proactive, who could take control and who could lead. And we managed to kind of distribute them and allow them to have, I suppose, a sense of ownership and make it quite natural. Because if someone's like that naturally, I think what you need to do is try and enable that and maybe look at ways of bringing the less confident students through. So we were very mindful of how we mixed the groups up. And again, when we talk about the amount of engagement and the amount of support that's required, that's something that you have to be all over from day one. And what was particularly good is because we've reduced the reduction, we reduced the assessment burden, it gave the lecturers a bit more time and space to think about those things. Because I think they're just equally as important as the knowledge that the students are actually able to evidence. So that was something that we found quite good. The other thing with these, I suppose, these commentaries, the staff are the only people that see these, so these are locked down. A lot of what we have in here is locked down, and students don't get to see certain things. So this was for staff for us to have that conversation. And then we would go in and say, right, yeah, that's what they were doing, and this is their take on it, which sometimes was very different from our take on things. Which I suppose that's the $1 million question: being able to have a bit of how do you evaluate performance, and that was something that we spoke extensively to when we brought the students in from the moment they arrived in August. Next, and that's it. I think that's just a screenshot from a video that we did for SQA that basically put together a nice wee overview of the student experience. And the student experience was very interesting because it's one of these things, the students had never done this before, we'd never done it before, so we didn't really know how it was going to land. But what they really enjoyed and what we got back in terms of the feedback was they loved just the practical element of it, and they loved the doing, and they loved just being immersed in the projects. And I'll take that any day of the week, to be honest. And that's myself. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. So the slide that we zoomed past, I'm not sure who was going to celebrate that, so nobody else has jumped in, so I certainly will. We are obviously absolutely delighted that we have our first cohort of NextGen HNC students graduating with their NextGen qualification. What an achievement, and it is obviously almost entirely due to the work of our colleagues in Edinburgh College and New College Lanarkshire today. So yeah, a very heartfelt thank you both for your presentation and for all that hard work that yourself and the teams have put in across the previous year. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Helen? So I'm going to say a few words about what is next before we open up the floor for questions. So in the 2022-23 academic year, we know that we have 12 different subjects piloting in 12 colleges and one education training provider. If I was asked at the start of the year if I expected that we would bring all those subjects to fruition, I don't think I'd have bet on that. But once again, the expectations for NextGen are being, my expectations are being exceeded and completely blown out the water at several points, and the fact that those subjects have come to fruition and will be going out to pilot next year is, yet another great achievement. We are implementing a programme of engagement and support for pilot centres, and that's something that Dom and Alan reflect on in their presentation. We know that we are here not just to rubber stamp the qualification, but also to make sure that our pilot centres are fully supported and genuinely working in that spirit of collaboration that we refer to so often when we speak about NextGen HN. It very much is a joint effort. Our programme of engagement and support involves those quality assurance activities, again, that were referred to, and quite a detailed programme of engagement about specific topics and general keeping in touch meetings as well. We're speaking here about our engagement with pilot centres, but that doesn't mean to say that the NextGen conversation stops for those that are not engaged as pilot centres either. So we will be putting out further engagement and touch points throughout for the next academic year. We are increasing our level of evaluation and research, and colleagues are working on that at present. And we are also piloting the use of our Stellar assessment tool. Alan was referring to Metaskills, and that Stellar tool is one interactive product that we are testing with those that wish to trial it. So again, we get feedback about the way in which it can be used and link in with, in particular, those Metaskills that Alan highlighted. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. I mentioned a number of subjects, so just giving you that list there on the screen. So we have computing, including data science. The four at the top are the qualifications from the first development year, so computing, engineering, television and radio. This year we developed accounting, childhood practice, fitness, health and exercise, which is now called physical activity and health, social sciences and social services. We also have our HNC horticulture, agriculture and agricultural technology. And the reason we have the UHI and SRUC titles in brackets afterwards are simply to reflect the different approaches that we took. So the first two sets of qualifications there are all national large developments led by SQA, and horticulture, agriculture and agricultural technology are our centre-led developments, with UHI taking the lead for horticulture and SRUC taking the lead for agriculture and agricultural technology. So a thanks to UHI and SRUC as well for stepping up to the mark there. Next slide, please. I mentioned a number of centres. I'm not going to read through them all in full. They're there on the screen so that you can see. So again, really excited to be working not with just with that increased number of qualifications next year, but also an increased number of centres coming on board as well. It is no small feat. It's a huge amount of work for everybody involved. I do say very often that I feel very privileged that we are able to engage in this way, and do feel privileged that so many colleges are willing to embrace the NextGen approach in 2022-23. Although it's a lot of hard work, I'm sure the feedback from Dom and from Alan today is positive and whets your appetite for more. I'm seeing lots of questions coming in on the chat there, so I am going to stop there. You have our contact details, you know where to find us, and if we can stop the recording, I'll open up for questions and answers.